And welcome to tonight's digital discussion. My name is John Harry, and glad to have you with us for a wonderful talk we have tonight with baseball historian Mary Shea, women's baseball in Milwaukee and the Midwest. And we'll get to that in just a little bit here. Some items to keep in mind while we're getting everybody settled in for our wonderful talk tonight. Our water exhibit, Milwaukee Where the Waters Meet, is on display through Saturday. So this is your chance this weekend. The next couple days is your chance to see that exhibit before we move on to the next thing. So make sure that you go see that. In relations to the water exhibit, we did do a collaborative beer with Indeed Brewing Company on South 2nd Street in Walker's Point. It's in salute to the Lady Elgin shipwreck of 1860, and it's a foreign extra stout Irish style beer, and it's delicious. And I think they're kind of on the tail end of their supply, so make sure you get out to have that. And $1 from each of the pints or growlers or crowlers or whatnot sold of that beer goes to the Milwaukee County Historical Society too. So you can get on that. Last week, you might remember we talked about our podcast effort with the Milwaukee County, or with the History Department at UWM. The last episode 7, just came out, so you can find that at milwaukeehistory.net/podcast and listen about the 1918 flu pandemic in Milwaukee. And one last thing is our next talk coming up in just a couple weeks on May 6th. If you can believe that May is almost already here. We're partnering with our friends at the Ephraim Historical Foundation in Door County. So it's Ephraim, Milwaukee's Door County connection. So you can think about your summer plans a little bit and the history of what's the connection between Milwaukee and Door County as well. We will be taking questions. Mary will be happy to answer those. If you do have any questions, just pop those right in the comments, and we'll do that afterwards. So just hold tight if you do have any questions, but feel free to enter them at any time. But without any further ado, I want to welcome baseball historian Mary Shea. Glad to have you here tonight, Mary.
Well, thanks so much for having me. Thank you to the Milwaukee County Historical Society for taking an interest in this, and also to all of you for being here. Happy Earth Day. So that's a big day. We want to protect the earth so we can enjoy things like baseball. So I'm hoping that this doesn't take as long as a baseball game and might be a little more entertaining than some of the games. So I'm hoping not to strike out as much. So no, I don't mean to make a cut. But anyway, we'll get started with our presentation. I'm Mary Shea. I'm a member of our SABRE chapter, the Society for American Baseball Research. I'm also an associate member of the All-American Girls Professional Baseball League. So that's how I've gotten involved and interested in women in baseball. So we're gonna go through a brief history of baseball just to put the Milwaukee team in perspective. So we're going to kind of focus on the 1944 Chicks, and we'll get to that in a little bit. So we might start out a little bit out east because that's really where baseball started. So I think a lot of people realize that baseball wasn't invented by Abner Doubleday in Cooperstown. It kind of evolved from ball and stick games, mostly rounders and cricket. So those are British games. They were very much children's games. So they were played by girls as much as boys. So women and girls have been playing baseball and ball and stick games as long as they've existed. So we're going to focus more on players, of course. So let's get started. So in the early 1800s, like I said, baseball kind of developed mostly in the East Coast cities, mostly New York. We think of it as kind of a rural game, but it really kind of evolved in cities. Baseball might have been, maybe the first game was played in Hoboken, New York in 1839. So around the 1840s, it was really becoming some form of baseball that we watch today. So it spread during the Civil War because of the soldiers playing, being all over the place. So it really kind of spread throughout the country. So when we get to the 1860s in Milwaukee, General Rufus King, a Civil War general, formed a team called the Cream Cities. And if you're on the east side, near Prospect and Royal, or near Brady Street, that's where they played. There's an historical marker commemorating Fort Reno. That was a Civil War encampment, and that's where the Cream Cities started playing. Out east, the first we know of women really organizing baseball is in Vassar. They actually formed two baseball teams. There was a doctor who was interested in women's health, and there were some women who really wanted to play as much as men. But they kind of had to keep it on lowdown. So there were the Seven Sister Schools out east, Smith, those women's colleges. They would play in the weekends, but they kind of had to play off the grounds, kind of hidden. It's really kind of silly how women were kind of considered too delicate to play a man's sport, even though it was still kind of a gentleman's game at that time. Women didn't play at co-ed schools. It was pretty much just the women's schools. So in the late 1800s, men's baseball as well as women's baseball developed into professional baseball. There were teams that were more, for the women, they're more of a novelty. Brightly colored uniforms. There were the blondes and brunettes who probably weren't that good. There was actually an all black team, a women's team called the Dolly Vardens. From what I've read, different accounts, I think they were probably pretty good. But again, just mostly a novelty act. Eventually, these bloomer girl teams developed, and they were professional teams. Now, bloomers were invented by Amelia Bloomer, kind of a feminist thing where big flouncy pants so that women could play sports without tripping over their long dresses. So the most important woman involved in these bloomer teams is Maud Nelson. I would love that she goes into the Baseball Hall of Fame. She's just incredible. So like this says, she pitched, she played third base, she scouted the players, she owned the teams, she owned several bloomer girl teams, and that went on for 40 years. So there were different teams, and all of them were pretty good. Usually they had 2 or 3 men on the team. So they would have, the men would be the pitcher and the catcher, maybe the shortstop, and they would switch batteries. That's the pitcher and the catcher with the other team they were playing. So they would travel around and play semi-pro teams or town teams. And like I said, very competitive. So there were the Star Bloomers, the Western Bloomer girls, and the All-Star Ranger girls were the last team that played in the 30s. Margaret Chisolo, we'll touch on her a little bit. She was a star first baseman. Rose Gossage was a star pitcher who eventually played for the Rockford Peaches. So, there's this continuity of women's baseball. So barnstorming teams that played men's pro and amateur teams, like I said, they often used 2 to 3 male players, and but they mostly played male teams. So interestingly, Smokey Joe Wood and Rogers Hornsby, both, Rogers Hornsby, the Hall of Famer, played on bloomer girl teams as they started out. So in those days, before television, you could make a lot of money traveling around and playing baseball. So Lizzie Arlington is notable, the first woman to sign a minor league contract. I think this is an interesting ad. It kind of shows a little her career, the kind of crazy outfit or uniform they wore. You get a good look at the bloomers. Alta Weiss is absolutely fascinating. So some of you might have heard of her. She started playing in about 1905. She was really into baseball. Her father was very supportive. They wouldn't let her play on the high school team, so her father bought her a team, actually built her a gym on their property, a heated gym so that she could practice. She was a very good pitcher. She played in League Park in Cleveland. That's where the Cleveland Indians played until the 1946-47. Let's look at this. Yeah, this is her team that her father formed for her, the Weiss All-Stars. And she started, first she was pitching in the dress, and then she started pitching in the bloomers. There's a connection with her to the All-American Girls Baseball League, which we'll get into in a little bit. Lizzie Murphy, another excellent player, first woman to play in a major league exhibition game. I think it's the Braves and the Red Sox. Here, she's not really wearing the bloomers, just regular baseball uniform. So you see them in both. Maud Nelson's teams mostly played in just regular baseball uniform. The New York Bloomer Girls, again, we're going to come eventually to the Midwest, but this was a very good team. Margaret Nabel was a good player. The Philadelphia Bobbies are an interesting story because, again, there were all these traveling teams that made money traveling around and playing. This was a young girls team. Most of the players weren't that good, but Edith Houghton, a girl named Edith Houghton, she was about 10 years old. She was the star shortstop. So they actually traveled to Japan. It was kind of an ill-fated trip because they didn't draw that well and ran out of money. They needed someone to help them get back to the States. But Edith Houghton is interesting in that, so in the 1930s, I need to backtrack. So in 1887, in Chicago, there were some Yale and Harvard alumni that they were kind of following football, and they wanted to keep themselves busy while they're waiting for the score. So they developed pretty much the game of softball as an indoor sport. I think they were hitting a boxing glove. And that's really how softball began. It's pretty much an indoor sport. By the 1930s, that was, even though girls had always been playing baseball, they kind of pushed girls into playing softball. Like I said, they thought baseball was too dangerous for them, that women were too delicate. But people like Edith Houghton, she really preferred playing baseball. She played softball if she had to. So when she actually joined the Navy in World War II and played for the naval baseball team. So and eventually became a scout for a short time for the Philadelphia Phillies. And we talked a little bit about Margaret Gisolo before she played for the Maud Nelson's All-Star Ranger Girls. She was a star player. In 1928, I think her team was named the Cubs. They played at Comiskey Park for a championship. And when the American Legion, this was Junior American Legion, when the American Legion found out that she was a girl, they banned girls from playing baseball in American Legion ball. So that kind of persisted through Little League. And then you really get to the 70s when a girl named Maria Pepe wanted to just play with her brother. And she had to fight through the court system for the right to play Little League baseball. By the time she won the case, she was too old to play, which is really kind of sad, but she opened up Little League baseball to girls. Another interesting story, Jackie Mitchell, she learned, I don't know if she learned a screwball she was a neighbor of Dazzy Vance. He was a Hall of Fame player for the Dodgers. And so she became a pretty good pitcher. She signed a minor league contract with the Chattanooga Lookouts. And then in 1931, the Yankees used to have spring training and travel up north and play all these exhibition games. And so Jackie Mitchell came into the game during the game and faced Babe Ruth and Lou Gehrig and struck them out back to back. And then she walked Tony Lazzari, and then I think she was taken out of the game. So there might be some debate whether it was just a novelty, just a show, or if she really was able to strike them out. But nonetheless, her contract was avoided by the commissioner of baseball, Kennesaw Mountain Landis. He didn't want blacks to play, and turns out he didn't want women to play baseball either. So, but Jackie Mitchell traveled around. She played with the House of David, which is interesting. They were like a religious cult that they had long beards. They were kind of a novelty. They'd travel around, and there were a couple of female players who used to play with the House of David, including Babe Dietrichson, probably one of the most famous or greatest female athletes. So So here we are at in the 40s. So again, most women are playing softball. Uh, some had played baseball as kids. I know one player, she played with the boys on regular baseball teams. So the All-American Girls Professional Baseball League, that's what we call them now. They went under different names. They started out as the All-American Girls Softball League. They kind of had different names. So I always mention A League of Their Own. It's a very beloved movie, a funny movie, and it's the reason that we know that these women played professionally and played well in the 40s and 50s. So the movie is kind of like about 80% correct. So the movie kind of presented it that women played baseball right away. So let's talk about how it started. So Philip Wrigley, he's from the chewing gum company in Chicago, and he owned the Chicago Cubs. And while, all the stars were going off to war, we see Hank Greenberg, Bob Feller, Joe DiMaggio, and even lesser players, especially the minor league teams were being cleaned out. So they were having trouble keeping baseball going. They kind of kept it going. But Philip Wrigley thought, well, I'm going to start, this league, a women's league. And just like Rosie the Riveter was working in factories during World War II, women kept baseball going during World War II. And that's how it started. So it started in 1943. There were 4 original teams. These are the 4 original players that were signed to contracts. Clara Chalice, Ann Harnett, Edie Perlick, and sitting down is Shirley Jamison. She's on the opening slide with that great swing. So I always recommend going to the All-American Girls Professional Baseball League. It's quite a mouthful, or you can just Google AAGPBL, the acronym, and they have a lot of good information. I like this graphic because it really shows in a nutshell the way the league progressed. So it started out as a softball league. As you can see, 12-inch full softball, 65 feet between the base paths, 40 feet pitching. It's underhand all the way until 1947. They start going sidearm. For real, and then overhand. You can see the ball getting smaller. So by the end of the league folded in 1954. A regular baseball is 9 inches. The regular base pass regulation baseball is 90 feet. So they were just getting about to regular baseball. These are the cities that are represented. So we're going to talk a little bit about Milwaukee. You can see the Milwaukee Chicks only lasted 1 year. So, and we'll talk about why they only lasted 1 year. Generally, the teams from major cities like Chicago, you can see they only lasted 1 year. Minneapolis only lasted 1 year. The same year in 1944, they just didn't draw as well. There were minor league teams that were still attracting fans. But in the smaller towns, they did very well. Rockford, they were beloved. So some of the things, if you've watched the movie, some of the things you'll see are true. They did really play in these ridiculous little dresses. On the left, you can see they had different colors for the away uniforms. They did have, on the right, home, even though it's just a black and white picture, they had home white uniforms. Very difficult to play in, if you can imagine. It was hard to pitch in. They'd have to safety pin the skirts of the pitchers so that the fabric wouldn't get in their way. And of course, the worst thing was the strawberries. They called them strawberries. If you slid into the dirt, if you've ever slid into dirt, you're going to get really hurt. And that dirt can really burn. And I've heard stories from players where sometimes they mix, the white chalk lines, they would mix with lye. And, if you were anywhere near the chalk line, you'd get that in to your strawberry. Or another thing they did was if the field was wet, they'd pour gasoline on it and fire it up. And if you play on that field, you get all these chemicals and your wounds. So these women were very, very tough. The charm school aspect of it, early on in the league, that was um, really happening. So there was a charm school that maybe some of the old timers like me remember. Patricia Stevens. Some of the women went there to learn to use makeup and walk gracefully and sit gracefully. Helena Rubinstein in Chicago was another charm school that they went to. So we'll just talk about a few of there were a lot of star players. I could spend way too much time talking about them. Some of the most notable are Dottie, Cammie Kamenchuk. Cammie was her nickname. Tremendous first baseman. So she was a power hitter, and a lot of uh, men's coaches who saw her thought she was a major league caliber first baseman defensively. Sophie Kurz, tremendous base stealer for the Racine Bells, 1946 Player of the Year. So that is correct. If you look at that stat, she stole 201 bases and only got thrown out 2 times. That's an incredible stat. Jean Fault is just amazing. She pitched 4 no-hitters, 2 perfect games. So as far as I know, she is the only professional pitcher, male or female, who has pitched 2 perfect games. So, and from what I've heard, she was a good bunter, a good hitter, just a great all-around player for the South Bend Blue Sox. So Annabelle Lee is interesting. She played, so the same year the Milwaukee Chicks were in existence, there were the Minneapolis Millerettes, and they didn't draw well at all. In fact, they started being called the Orphans because they pretty much just traveled all the time. But they had a very good pitcher, left-handed pitcher named Annabelle Lee. It turns out her nephew was Bill Spaceman Lee, if you remember the Red Sox from the 1970s. Kind of an interesting pitcher. So both left-handed. But that's just a little tie-in. He said that she helped him learn to pitch. So I just want to get into some local players, even if they're not all Milwaukee, just players I know well and I think are interesting and are close to Milwaukee. Joyce Hill Westerman is from Kenosha, and the Wisconsin Historical Society actually has a biography on her called, I think it's called Joyce Westerman, American Hero. And her biographer kind of talked about her that she, as he studied her and researched her career, she played for several teams, and she always seemed to do something that helped her teams win. So I always kind of like to describe her as the Ben Zobrist of the All-American Girls Professional Baseball League, just helped her teams win. She was mostly catcher and played first base. On the right, she's holding one of the 2 uniforms she saved. She has another uniform that she actually donated to the Smithsonian. So if you ever go to the Smithsonian Museum in Washington, you might see her uniform. I think it was next to Michael Jordan's. They had a number of uniforms. Unfortunately, we lost Joyce this past January, which is very sad, but she had a good career. And one story I remember from her biography is I think she had an aunt that kind of thought she wouldn't end up, she would end up being nothing because she wasn't being a housewife and mother. And it turns out she ended up getting married and had 2 kids and the most wonderful family you could ever imagine. So Jackie Matson Baumgart, even though she was born and raised in Waukegan, she came to Milwaukee as a teenager and became very involved with the softball that was being played in Milwaukee, particularly at 35th and Burnham. If you ever listen to Brewers games, sometimes Bob Uecker will talk about all the fast pitch softball, competitive fast pitch softball that was played in Milwaukee, and she was certainly a part of that. So she was a catcher, a very small catcher, and she played on travel teams. So by the early 50s, they had teams that traveled around. So on the right is Sister Dr. Tony Palermo. She's very, very interesting, very fun. She played very young. So they had junior teams. Like once in a while, somebody will say, "Oh, my aunt played for the Junior Bells, the Racine team," and so they were almost like minor league teams, getting girls ready to play in the league. Even though the All-American girls, one thing that's interesting about them is the players were from all over the country, uh, several from Canada, and even a few from Cuba. So the players came from all over. But Sister Tony Palermo, she came from Chicago. She also played traveling team. They would play like a few innings before a game at Yankee Stadium, things like that, or just like the Bloomer girls played teams. They would travel around and play teams. Her best years were probably ahead of her. She ended up joining the convent. So it's kind of interesting. I think her best years were ahead of her. We don't know how good she would have been. So she eventually earned a doctorate at Madison and 3 master's degrees. So she's Dr. Tony Palermo. And one time they radar gunned her arm. She was a shortstop with a very strong arm, and they clocked her at about 83 miles an hour. So that's pretty impressive. And she was a very fast runner. So so now we get to we'll talk or focus on the Milwaukee Schnitz. Again, they only played in 1944. So the emblems they had on their uniforms were usually the seal of the city. So when you see the movie, those are different emblems, the embroidery that's on their uniforms. So this is the official City of Milwaukee seal, very cool. And the reason they're called the Schnitz, so that the teams really didn't always have a name, so at least to begin with. So the Journal and the Sentinel, the Milwaukee papers, kind of called them the Schnitz, and it's a funny name. A Schnitt is German for a little beer, so you think of little beer, a little brewer. Little beer is like the little beer you get with a Bloody Mary in Milwaukee. I guess that's a Milwaukee thing. So you have people outside of Milwaukee wondering why they get a little beer with their Bloody Mary, and I'm like, just drink it. It's free beer. So, but the Milwaukee Chicks were at first about a 500 team, and then they really took off in the second half. So they were an excellent team. So just to talk about a few members. So here they are in their home whites. Way on the right is their manager, Max Carey. So the All-American girls, they really did have former players managing their teams. Max Carey he eventually became a Hall of Famer. He was like a star center fielder for the Pittsburgh Pirates. So he was really good defensively and a really good base runner. I think he had stolen a lot of bases, and he really taught that to his players. And I've talked to several women who basically said that he was as good of a coach as he was a player. Just tremendous. There's some interesting players. One of my favorites is Sylvia Ronsky, just because she's from my neighborhood. I live here in the River West neighborhood of Milwaukee. So Milwaukeeans who know where that is, that's just north of downtown. Sylvia actually grew up on Hubbard Street, so that would be the Harambee neighborhood, but very close to River West. And she went to St. Casimir grade school. Some of you might know St. Casimir Church and Riverside High School. There are a couple of other players from Wisconsin, Vivian Sheriffs, and there's a player named Doris Tetzlaff, I think, from Watertown. So, and then they're just very good players. Let's talk about, first of all, where they played. So Borchard Field, some of you have heard of Borchard Field. It's a very, very storied ballpark. So it's where the minor league Brewers. So so in the 1800s, there were iterations of the Cream Cities and the Milwaukee Brewers. So I do tours for the Brewers at the ballpark, and a lot of people say, well, how did they become the Milwaukee Brewers? And it really goes back to the 1800s. In 1901, the Brewers had an inaugural American League team. That's when the American League was formed. In fact, the American League was formed in downtown Milwaukee, at least legally. So they left and moved to St. Louis, became the St. Louis Browns, and then moved to Baltimore and became the Baltimore Orioles. But in 1902, we had the minor league Brewers, and these teams played at now the 1901 Brewers played at Lloyd Street Grounds, but the minor league Brewers played at Orchard Field. And for those of you in Milwaukee, Orchard Field was between 7th and 8th Street and Burleigh and Chambers. So now the freeway, I-43, goes pretty much right over it. So some of these houses that you can see in the background, they still stand. And there's a historical marker nearby, I think on 5th Street in the Clinton Rose Park. So Orchard Field has an amazing history. It was kind of a ramshackle wooden ballpark. But there's a book called Orchard Field by Bob Beege. I highly recommend that because all the Hall of Famers and just fascinating people that played or were involved in this ballpark is tremendous. So this is where the Milwaukee Chicks played. And what made it really tough for them is that the Milwaukee Chicks pretty much had to play day games because the Milwaukee Brewers got all the night games. The owner of the Brewers was Bill Veeck, a Hall of Fame executive, just a tremendous story in himself. And the Brewers were actually doing well and were pretty popular. So it was pretty hard to draw people just for the day games. They averaged maybe 200 to 300 people from what I've read. Some people thought the 95-cent ticket price was a little high. So even though they had a great team, it was hard to draw fans. So like I said, they were a 500 team at first, and then they went 40-19 in the second half. So just other ballparks to mention around the Midwest. So the All-American Girls, as you could see from the teams, was distinctly a Midwest enterprise. So all the teams were pretty much in the Midwest. So you can still visit a couple of the ballparks where the other teams played. Horlick Field in Racine. That's where the Racine Bells played, and they still have the ticket window and the stone facade. And I think they put artificial turf on and play football there, but still, it's kind of a cool thing to see. Simmons Field in Kenosha, it was where the Kenosha Comets played. And interesting, so in the playoffs in 1944, the Milwaukee Chicks didn't draw well enough to even play playoff games at Orchard Field. So they played all their games in Kenosha. Actually, that ballpark was Lakefront Stadium. That's no longer with us. Eventually, the Kenosha Comets played at Simmons Field. Simmons Field is the home of the Kenosha Comets, which is a Northwoods League team. It's like Cape Cod League. It's male college players and wooden bats. And I really recommend a game there. So in 1944, though, their star player, I would say, was Connie Wisniewski. So you can see maybe her pitching motion. She was a star underhand softball pitcher. She went 23-10 in 1944. She won all 4 games out of the 7-game playoff for the Milwaukee Chicks. So she pretty much carried the team. Interestingly, as the league moved to overhand pitching, she didn't do as well. She was one of those pitchers that had trouble transitioning from underhand pitching to sidearm to overhand pitching, but just a tremendous underhand pitcher. So in 1945, the Chicks moved to Grand Rapids, and there they stayed until 1954. Connie Wisniewski actually had her best years in 45 and 46. So I just want to mention something about Milwaukee Chicks, or Schnitz name. Like I said, they kind of started out as the Schnitz because that's what the newspapers called them. They acquired the name the Chicks, and it sounds like a very sexist name. And there's probably plenty of sexism back then, as there still is. But in this case, it was kind of in reference to Max Carey, their wonderful manager. And during the 40s, there was a popular children's book called Mother Carey's Chickens. So that's how it was Carey's Chicks. That's how they became the Milwaukee Chicks. So after the league folded in 1954, some of the women played for a traveling team called the Bill Allington All Stars. So, they traveled around and played. But really, not a lot happened for women's baseball for a while. But what's really, really incredible is there were three women who played in the Negro Leagues. Now, generally, the height of the Negro Leagues was 1920 up through integration, 50, 51. So you're getting to the end of the Negro Leagues. They're having trouble drawing. A lot of their stars are going to the major leagues. So there was a team called the Indianapolis Clowns. So a lot of you who remember a beloved player in Milwaukee baseball history that played for the Milwaukee Braves and the Atlanta Braves, and a little bit for the Milwaukee Brewers is DH Henry Aaron, was their star second baseman. And he played for a little bit and got signed by the Braves. So they wanted maybe to have a novelty or draw people to the game. So they got Tony Stone, who was a very committed baseball player, an excellent baseball player. I mean, she wanted to play baseball. And so she played with the Clowns in 53 and 54. She was traded to the Kansas City Monarchs. She got a hit off of Satchel Paige, played with a lot of great Negro League stars like Ernie Banks and Willie Mays. And there's an excellent book called Curveball about her. And there was even an off-Broadway play about Tony Stone. So the other two women who played were Mamie Peanut Johnson. She was a pitcher for the Clowns. And so Tony Stone actually wanted to play with the All-American girls. I think she had a tryout. I know there were a handful of Black women who tried out for the All-American girls. They were kind of given sham tryouts. So even though it was after 1947, when Jackie Robinson had integrated the major leagues, the All-American girls just couldn't pull the trigger on getting a Black player, even though these women were outstanding. Mamie Peanut Johnson, in a generosity of spirit, said, it's fine. She was better off playing for the Negro Leagues. I don't know, but the All-American girls eventually made her an honorary member of the All-American girls. So trying to right or wrong for whatever they could do. Connie Morgan was the third woman who played in the Negro Leagues, a second baseman. So a lot didn't happen with women's baseball. There might have been, like I said, girls couldn't even play Little League. There might have been girls playing for boys' teams here and there if the coach would let them get away with it. But it really wasn't illegal till Maria Pepe did her case in the 70s. So at least girls were starting to play Little League baseball. Not a lot. It was still very tough for them. Some interesting things happened. And this has a Milwaukee connection because the Sun Sox. So there was a guy named Bob Hope who worked for the Atlanta Braves, not the entertainer Bob Hope, thanks for the memories, but a different Bob Hope. And he wanted to buy a minor league team and have it be all female. And so as it says here, Henry Aaron, he was chosen as their director of player personnel. So he was involved in this. Eventually, the team was sold to another town. The team just never materialized. But I thought this was an interesting quote from Henry Aaron. And you can read it. In some ways, he's talking about hitting isn't that tough. I guess if you're Henry Aaron, just a tremendous hitter, to me, the all-time home run king. Total base, 6,856 total bases, which just relentless offense. So maybe hitting wasn't so hard for him, but I think his point was that women definitely play baseball. So he was involved in that. You get into the idea of firsts for women. The first woman to play on a men's NCAA baseball team is Julie Croteau. And she eventually played for the Silver Bullets. Let's just touch on the Silver Bullets. Uh, Not uniquely Midwestern, they traveled all over the place. So they were kind of like the old Bloomer Girl teams, except they didn't have the two men that they traded off. They were an all women's team. Most of these women were raised playing softball. I mean, once in a while, you had women like Julie Croteau who just wanted to play baseball, and that's what they were good at. But so they at first they had a hard time, because baseball and softball are really two different sports. But they really kind of came into their own and started winning their last year. They were sponsored by Coors Brewery, and that's why they were called the Silver Bullets. But they lost their funding, so really unfortunate. I really wish I had a chance to see them play. So I think sitting down there, I think that's Phil Niekro. He's a Hall of Fame pitcher, Nuxie. He had a great knuckleball. We just lost him along with Henry Aaron this year. Both passed away, but he was the manager of the team. Also in the 1990s, we have a woman named Isla Borders, just an incredible story. So first woman to pitch for an NCAA men's baseball team. So she was signed by the St. Paul Saints. So she's the first woman that was playing professionally since, Connie Morgan and Mamie Peanut Johnson and Tony Stone in the Negro Leagues. So she was left-handed, had good control, so really didn't blow it by them, but she, knew where to put the ball, and really started having success. Her last team, one of her last teams, the Madison Black Wolf, she really had her best go of it. And then she ended up with the Zion Pioneers. She wanted to just be invited for spring training. But a lot of teams thought it would be a distraction. It's just too bad she wasn't given the chance, just a distraction. So we get into the idea of, should women play baseball with men because there aren't women's teams, or should we develop a league of their own like there was? Interestingly, Isla didn't want to play with the Silver Bullets, I don't think. She really wanted to try to make it with the men's teams. So there's a great book, her biography, called Making My Pitch. Highly recommend that. I think if there is a woman who ever breaks it into the major leagues, it would be a woman who has like a trick pitch, like a knuckleball. And I just like to mention Ari Yoshida because I think she's amazing. She used to just watch knuckleball a Red Sox pitcher, Tim Wakefield, on TV, and she wanted to pitch like that. That's how she taught herself to pitch a knuckleball. And she was good. She played professionally in Japan and then the United States, minor league ball, and Canada. She played in 3 different countries. There was also a girl called Tulsia Baker who had a knuckleball. I thought, she pitched batting practice for the Tampa Bay Rays. She was mowing down high school players, but that never really materialized. It's pretty hard for women to, they're just not going to have the muscle mass that men have. So I think kind of what we're hoping for is that there's another league of their own, that there's another women's league. But Monet Davis was a great story. A lot of you might remember her pitching in the World Series a few years back. Just a tremendous athlete. She loves playing basketball. Unfortunately, I think she's playing softball. I shouldn't say unfortunately. A lot of women switch to softball, not because they really want to. I mean, they like playing baseball, but that's where the scholarships are. And so they have to make a tough decision. So as of now, there are about 100,000 girls or more. That might change. Playing Little League, thousands that have played in high school. There are a handful that are actually playing in college, and that's another great story. And I'm just going to end with this. So we've come full circle from the 1800s all the way up until now, and a lot of Americans have never really heard of this, that the USA has, there's a World Baseball Classic for men's players. That's every few years. The women play, they have a team too. The USA has a women's World Cup team, and they've played every year since 2004. And at first, the US team was the powerhouse, but they don't really get the encouragement that maybe other teams do. So now Canada is becoming very good. But the real powerhouse in women's baseball is Japan. So there's a pitcher named Yoshinori Sato. Tremendous. I mean, probably the best women's pitcher in the world, just one of the best athletes in the world. Japan has a professional women's league. They actually have 4 teams and play in a professional league. So hopefully we can get that going in the United States. So what we have now is people are really pushing for, or not pushing, but supporting girls and women playing baseball. There's so the American Girls Professional Baseball League, one of the players, Sue Zaipe, has spearheaded a group called American Girls Baseball, and they not only support girls playing baseball, but they're trying to get like a women's league or at least a women's tournament going in Florida. So we'll see how that develops. So there's an organization called Baseball for All, and if you know any girls who play baseball, usually they're like the only girl on boys teams. Baseball for All is a great organization to connect with. They have tournaments, and then the girls get to play with other girls, and they really like doing that. There are a lot of teams. So speaking of the Midwest, I don't know of a girls team in Milwaukee. There is one in Chicago called the Humboldt Gators, and they had a really good start. So there are quite a few all girls little league teams around the country, the Boston Slammers and DC Force, and the Bay Area has girls teams. So it is developing. So and hopefully girls can play more with other girls. They don't have to be the only girl on the team. There's also an organization called the International Women's Baseball Center, and I was talking about ballparks, and the Rockford Peaches played at a ballpark called Bayard Stadium, and you can visit that site. The ticket window is still there, and they've created like a very nice outdoor museum. They really want to create a women's baseball center. So if you're ever in Rockford, I mean, check out Bayard Stadium. It's a very cool place to visit. They've recreated the field, and they have little dugouts, and it's just a great center for girls and women's baseball. So I'll end with that. And if there are any questions.
We do have a few questions. Excellent.
Okay.
Mary.
I love questions.
So interesting to hear about this history. Nicole wants to know how long of a career did like some of the best players have, like in the All-American Girls Professional Baseball League? Did they last the whole run of it, or how,
Yeah.
How did it go? Yeah.
Yeah, there's I forget the woman who there are women who played, not many. I know of at least one woman who played from 1943 to 1954. There was a woman called Betsy Jockum. She's 100 years old. She lives in South Bend, where she played. She played a number of years. Jean Faut. So I'm not prepared to give the number of years that those players have played. Joyce, who I mentioned, she had a very solid career, 7 years. So you can go, like I said, you can go on the All-American Girls website, and you can just click on teams and players and get all sorts of good information. And there's also, I have my sources here. These are, this doesn't include all the great books you can read on women's baseball. There's an encyclopedia of women's baseball by Leslie Heafy, and she's the vice president of SABR, the Society for American Baseball Research, and there's a lot of good information on that. So yeah, I can't really list the players and how many years they played, but I know of at least one player who did.
Carol is actually chiming in. She says one player played all 12 years. So,
so it's just the one player. Yeah. That must be Carol Sheldon. She knows her stuff.
You got it.
There are people out there who know a lot more than I do. So
yeah, we had Joy chime in too with Sister Tony being a Vernal College alumnus.
Absolutely.
So, and another local connection there. Um,
Absolutely. Thank you, Joy. Yeah. Yeah.
so yeah, I think, maybe one more to like to kind of sum up, the talk tonight, from Nicole. So she says, do you have any sense of why women's baseball seems to get less attention than like women's basketball or women's soccer? So, you have the WNBA, or women's soccer has leagues too and all this. And why do you think baseball is kind of kept away um, from that arena?
Yeah. I don't know if it's just the culture of the sport, other sports are ahead. I love that question because it just brings it to light. And the other sports are ahead of us as far as having officials, the NFL and the NBA. Whereas baseball, we don't have any female umpires. There are two women who are in the minor leagues now, Emma Charles Sealer and Jen Powell. And it takes a few years, 5 to 6 years to, go through the trenches in the minor league and reach the major leagues. There was one woman, Pam Postuma, years ago who got up to AAA and just never made it. And I think the culture is part of it. One thing I'd love to see Major League Baseball do is support a women's league. I believe, I don't know a lot about the NBA and the WNBA, but as far as I know, they've financially supported the WNBA, at least initially. Major League Baseball maybe doesn't want to do that because when do the women play? Do they play during the season and compete against the men's sport? So it's a little dicey that way. Like I said, Sue Zaipe, one of the players getting this league going, they would play in October. So maybe they would get some support. So yeah, so I wonder if it's just baseball can be, we think of it as progressive because of Jackie Robinson integrating the sport, but in some ways it can be a little too stodgy and too much of a culture of, a macho culture. So I think that might have hurt baseball as well. I should have mentioned that there were three women who played for the Sonoma Stompers. That's a minor league team out in California, independent, and they really held their own. They're women who played on the Women's World Cup team. But I don't know why. Like, it would be really cool for the Northwoods League to just have one or two women play. The talent is there. I don't know why they can't push the button. But one thing that has improved is coaching. So there are a number of coaches in Major League Baseball who are female, mostly in the minor leagues. Rachel Balkovic for the Yankees. Rachel Folden is a minor league hitting coach for the Cubs. Alyssa Knockin is a major league coach for the Giants. And then the Brewers hired Sarah Goodrum. I don't know if I'm pronouncing her name correctly, but she became a minor league coach. And that's really hard because most of these women were played softball. They were kind of forced to play softball at one point, even if they loved playing baseball. Sure. So they put it on them. Well, how can you coach men playing baseball when you played softball? That's really not fair. So I'm wondering, are competitive girl players, are they better served playing baseball rather than softball? I mean, that's open for debate. That's like a whole thing. And, the same thing with the first general, I don't know if people realize, the first woman general manager in baseball was hired this year, Kim Ng, for the Florida Marlins. Oh. Because she was an assistant general manager for the Yankees when Derek Jeter came up. So Derek Jeter, who was a part owner of the Florida Marlins now, he really liked her, but she was just tremendously qualified. She was also an assistant general manager for the Los Angeles Dodgers. Everybody thought of her as a big prospect for being a general manager. She didn't attend an Ivy League school, but she got her degree from the University of Chicago, which is a very prestigious school, played softball, really knew the sport. So, but it took her years and years to get hired as a general manager. And I really admire Derek Jeter for taking the chance. But still, the hiring in Major League Baseball is I think they get a report card every year for their hiring practices on women. And before they got an F, and now that they've hired Kim Eng and some coaches, they get a C. So they have a lot of work to do.
Yeah, absolutely. And hopefully progress keeps being made, right?
Absolutely. Yeah.
So, well, great. Well, hopefully, have you made it to a Brewers game yet this year?
I have. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
I haven't yet. I have to still, but I haven't yet. So, but
it's really wonderful to be at a ballpark. I mean, even with just 25% capacity, it's just wonderful.
Depending on the year that you might have seen the Brewers, and if it was a day game, that would have been it might have been that kind of turnout anyway. So
exactly right. Yeah. Some people are making jokes about the Marlins that this is their
full capacity. Yeah. All right. Well, thank you, Mary, so much for the super interesting talk. And we'll keep an eye on the world of baseball and gender issues and things like that too. So thank you for your talk tonight.
Well, thank you for having me, and thank you all of you who have listened to this. Thank you for your time, and I think we can line up some schnitz. And
we're due now, right? Yeah.
I think,
in a couple of weeks, our next talk is coming up. Ephraim, Milwaukee's Door County Connection. So we hope you join us in a couple of weeks. And until then, I'd want to mention one more time that our our water exhibit, Milwaukee, where the waters meet, is only open till Saturday. So if you have a chance to get downtown and see that, that's the next couple of days. Please do so. But until we see you again, everybody stay safe, stay healthy, and batter up. So, all right, take it easy. Bye-bye.